Thank you so much for having me. Good afternoon. It's officially afternoon in Chicago as well. It's a beautiful day outside. So thank you for choosing to spend your time listening to me talk. My name is Jonathan Morley, and I'm about to read you a disclaimer. It's the fine print in large font. I'm representing myself and only my opinions. It's my content unless otherwise noted. I have to tell you, I'm not a financial advisor, and this is not financial advice. So please don't go get a second mortgage and throw it all into cryptocurrency just because you're excited about the things that you're learning today. I do own a bit of cryptocurrency, and I wrote a book on related topics. So you're welcome to check out the content in that material if you found today interesting. And if not, that's fine too. I only give these types of presentations because I really enjoy the topics. I love the questions that come through. I like that it gets people thinking about money in a different way. But with all of that said, I'd love for you to just be very wary of get rich quick schemes, scams. A lot of that exists in this newer technology. So make sure you're doing your due diligence and research before, again, you take out that second mortgage. I have about 45 minutes to cover 10 years worth of material. So it's okay if you don't understand everything in this presentation. In fact, I expect that you won't. My goal is to generate questions from you and encourage you to go research those topics on your own. I'm not an expert, but I can certainly point you in the right direction for a lot of things in these areas because I've been in it for 10 years. And please reach out in the future. I love hearing back from folks. That's how I was connected to this organization. I had given a topic through Alma College's Tartan Talk series on the same topic, and reached out and said, "Hey, would you come talk to our folks?" Of course, I'd love to do that. So our agenda today is fairly simple. We're gonna level set. We're gonna talk about Bitcoin. We're gonna move into blockchain more prominently and what those technologies look like. Talk through some benefits and use cases around blockchain technologies, and then also challenges, my ideas for trends and shaping, and Q&A at the end. Certainly along the way as you have them, feel free to unmute and bravely speak up in this very quiet room. I have a bachelor's and master's in computer science from Alma College and DePaul University. I completed my master's of business administration from the University of Michigan, the Flint campus. And I've spent the past decade in financial services at CME Group. 9 of those 11 at this point years, I served as a software engineer. So I was working on code bases. I was working with some of our clearing technologies, our trading technologies, and our emerging technologies. But more recently, my role has centered around cost optimization and recruiting. So how do we find top talent? How do we match those individuals with their future careers? And how do we control the money that we're spending throughout our organization? I let Tom in from the waiting room, so I'm keeping my eye on that too. I have one single solitary claim to fame, and that I wrote a book, and the book did really, really well. It's about 4 years old now, and the topic is still entirely relevant. That book on blockchain was a bit of a joke. I wanted people to say, "Have you read that book on blockchain?" And people would say, "No, what book on blockchain?" And they'd say, "That book on blockchain." Cheeky little name. It did surprisingly well. I thought I might sell 2 copies. I would buy one. Maybe my mom would buy one. But it sold thousands of copies. It's made it to 19 different countries. It's made it to bestsellers lists, top 10 in financial technology, computer literacy. But the most exciting part for me is I've gone on almost a presentation spree talking about this topic at universities, businesses, college campuses. It's been really, really fun. So naturally, being kind of the extroverted person that I am, I went all in and wrote 2 more, big data and artificial intelligence and machine learning. I co-wrote those with a colleague of mine from CME named Bobby Timberlake. So if the idea of computers knowing what you're going to do before you're going to do it, it piques your interest, you might be interested in the book with the cute little dog on the cover. I'm about to read you a quote, and I'd love for you to just gut check and think, do I agree? Do I disagree? Does this sound wildly fanciful? And we'll revisit it at the end of the presentation and see if your opinion has changed at all. Here's the quote. "The first generation of the digital revolution brought us the internet of information. The second generation, powered by blockchain technology, is bringing us the internet of value, a new platform to reshape the world of business and transform the old order of human affairs for the better." Now, if you ask me, even 10 years later, that's a pretty big, tall order, transforming the old order of human affairs for the better, all because of this thing called blockchain. So let's talk a little bit about money. What if I told you there was a magical money supply? Now imagine in this magical money supply that there were infinite amounts of money. Imagine also that that money was worth less each and every day it existed. Imagine that the money was controlled by a very small group. And even worse, imagine that money couldn't be spent everywhere. Would you use it? Some of you may have thought, boy, that sounds an awful lot like the US dollar. And in some cases, this is very, very true. And it's the way that our financial system today works. There's an infinite amount of money. You can always print more. And when you need to print more, it becomes worth less. We don't decide how money is made or how much is printed. That's a decision made by a small group of people. And you can't spend your money everywhere. You couldn't go, for example, to Europe and take a $5 bill to pay for coffee. You would need to use euro and exchange that money. So today, our financial system is entirely centralized. So if you pick your favorite letter A through F and imagine that you're one of the dots on this page, your money is always exchanged through an intermediary, unless you're doing like a garage sale, right? You're giving someone money hand to hand. Generally, you're going to a gas pump and you're swiping a card or you're paying an attendant. All of that's going through a central intermediary. Blockchain attempts to solve for this by asking, what if that intermediary didn't exist? Well, in today's traditional financial system, A can no longer transact with any of the other participants unless it's a hand-to-hand transaction. There's no intermediary there to help facilitate. So a little over 10 years ago, somebody came up with the idea of Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is a decentralized digital currency, meaning by definition, there's nobody in the middle helping to facilitate those transactions. So in October of 2008, the white paper was released. White paper is really just a fancy technical term for like a definition, a technical definition. And it was written by this mysterious entity called Satoshi Nakamoto. And nobody to this day knows who or whom Satoshi Nakamoto is. A lot of people generally credit him of being a male of European descent based on linguistics and the way that the typing was done. But Satoshi is really the brainchild of the Bitcoin network. And this isn't a new idea at this point. It's over 10 years old. Satoshi released the first iteration of Bitcoin in January of 2009. And as we'll see a little bit later in the presentation, to prove that the Bitcoin hadn't been created any earlier than that date in January of 2009, Satoshi embedded in the code of Bitcoin the headline from the paper that had come out that morning. And the headline was, "The Chancellor's on the brink of a second bailout for banks," which is a bit fitting considering we're talking about the financial ecosystem. So Bitcoin I bring up initially in these conversations because a lot of folks have heard about it, but perhaps don't entirely understand what it is or how it works. So I spend a few minutes talking about that. The first question is Bitcoin digital money or is it a payment system? The answer is both. By design, Bitcoin is a deflationary money supply, meaning there will never be more than a certain number in existence. Also, by definition, it's a very slow payment system. If all of us on this call and all of our relatives and all of our friends were to start using Bitcoin right now, it would be very difficult for the network to keep up with the amount of transactions. We'll see a little bit later why that comes into play in the monetary system side of payment system of Bitcoin. But the really key point that Satoshi drove home was that this system is decentralized. There is no intermediary in the middle that says whether or not funds can be exchanged. So thinking back to letters A through F, all of those participants are in the middle. There is no bank facilitating those. We'll talk a bit more about what that means too. Bitcoin also is distributed in the sense that it can't be shut down. So I use the example of Citibank or Chase or Discover Bank. Pick your favorite bank. You have probably a debit card or a credit card. And if you were to go and purchase something and that card was declined, your only recourse is to call the bank. Hey, why did my card get declined? Hey, did I overdraft my account? Hey, this isn't actually a fraudulent submission, and I did want to purchase $100 in gasoline because gas prices are so high right now. In the Bitcoin network, none of that matters. And as long as you own the rights to the thing, the Bitcoin, the digital currency side of things, nobody can tell you how to spend it. And nobody can facilitate that because the entire network as a whole will do it for you by design. So I say it's distributed and you can't shut it down, because as long as there is one participant in a cryptocurrency network, that network survives. So even if 99.999% of Bitcoin users stopped using the network, that 0.00001% would keep the Bitcoin network alive. The funds would all still be whole, and the entire system would still remain resilient. So it sounds nice on paper, right? It's a decentralized network. It's a flow of funds back and forth between participants. Nobody can shut it down. Nobody controls it. But is it really being used? And I'll give you some statistics to show that it is. In fact, the daily transaction volume denominated in dollars is quite a bit. That's $4.1 billion every day moving around on this network. Even more impressive, there's nobody facilitating it. It's the network itself, the computer code, that is ensuring all of those funds go to the right places at the right time. So think back to that initial image of the bank in the middle, A through F on the outsides. If we transform that into the Bitcoin network or a blockchain network, it starts to look like this, where all of the participants are connected to each other. No bank in the middle to disappear and disconnect all of those peers. So if you look closely at the letter F, which is in the bottom right-hand corner, if F as a participant in this network decided to no longer participate, well, everyone else remains whole. Everyone else can still facilitate transactions with each other. I'm going to pause here for a quick drink break. I'd encourage you to type any questions that you have now or unmute while I take a drink. And I'd love to address your questions as we go further in this presentation.
Hi, this is Dick Bremer. I've seen various names of Bitcoin people, I think, or systems. I mean, are there different networks, or is it? It's not just one network at this point.
Yeah, great question, Dick. There are thousands of cryptocurrencies in existence today. Now, you could start your own. I could start one, the Jonathan coin. All of the source code, all of the computer code for these networks is readily available on the internet. And Satoshi's vision was that it would be copied and improved. Unlike the YouTube algorithm, copyright striking your videos, Bitcoin said, take it, do something better with it. Satoshi said, I want you to use this and improve on it. So today there are thousands of different cryptocurrencies. Now, are all of those cryptocurrencies used? Are all of those cryptocurrencies useful? Becomes the question. So I bring up Bitcoin as a big example because Bitcoin today has the largest market cap. The most money is flowing through the Bitcoin network today. There are several others, maybe top 4, that have become well known in the industry as useful and used. Ethereum, I bring up Ethereum later in the presentation. Ethereum is also a cryptocurrency, but it's also a computing platform. So you can do things on the Ethereum network outside of just sending digital tokens back and forth. There's also Ripple as an example of other cryptocurrencies. And I'll give you resources towards the end to look into these. Each of the cryptocurrencies attempts to do something in a slightly different way or solve a problem in a slightly different way, improving on a previous iteration. Bitcoin is just the one that seems to have stuck and been around the longest. Other questions before we go back to our friend, the dollar? So in the traditional finance system that we discussed, There are infinite amounts of money. In many blockchain networks, there's a cap to the supply. And what that means is instead of seeing inflation, where your dollars purchase less over time, the networks are designed to be deflationary, meaning the purchasing power increases over time because the physical thing that you use to spend in exchange of value becomes more rare. I'll say that a different way. In the Bitcoin network, there will never be more at a certain time than there ever has been. Because the asset is becoming more scarce, it is becoming more valuable. Deflationary versus inflationary. Inflation rates in the US are something like 7% right now. What that means is your $100 bill buys 7% less now than it did a year ago. In the Bitcoin network, that $100 bill is worth more because there aren't as many of them and there won't be more. Beanie Baby craze comes to mind for some folks that remember, like the scarcity of finding Beanie Babies, the value appreciated because there were so few of them left. The US dollar is worth less every day because it inflates. One Bitcoin is always worth one Bitcoin. And there's an argument there that it appreciates in value. There are counter arguments to everything that I'm saying, by the way, but I'm giving you kind of basic examples. The dollar is controlled by a small group of people. It's the Federal Reserve and people setting, policymakers. The Bitcoin network is controlled by the network itself. And unless 50% of the participants in that network agree to do something different, the network carries on as it was. So majority rules in a lot of these cryptocurrencies. And because there are so many different participants in a network, it takes a lot to get to a majority. There's also a financial interest in making the decisions. 50% of Bitcoin users are not going to agree on something that makes the network less safe or less secure or move slower. There's a vested financial interest in majority in these cases. The dollar can't be spent everywhere, but Bitcoin can be spent anywhere that's connected to the internet. There are even ham radio operators that send Bitcoin transactions. It doesn't need to be a computer connected to the internet. It could be a radio wave. You can do Bitcoin by hand on paper if you really wanted to. I will warn you, it is exhausting and not good for your hand, but you could write out a Bitcoin transaction and transfer it on paper if you wanted to. There's no intermediary to stop you from doing it. So blockchain really becomes exciting for companies. Accenture Consulting, the World Economic Forum, they've estimated $10 billion in cost savings in back office processing. So anytime you have to reconcile information, it becomes trivial to do on a blockchain because the reconciliation is always correct. We'll talk more about that soon. Again, very broad claim. There's about 70 patent applications every month, and that number was from 2 years ago. So you can imagine just the sheer number of intellectual property grabs going on at the moment for blockchain stuff. There are 24 countries actively participating in blockchain research. So these are people that have come forward and said, we're doing something with blockchain. Dubai in the United Arab Emirates pledged to be the first government that did all of their paperwork on a blockchain. So land deeds, these types of things. And 93% of the survey participants agreed that global banks have become excessively complex. So blockchain, not Bitcoin, but blockchain, similar, brings some really cool benefits. The first is that the data is immutable. Once you've written that data to a blockchain, you cannot change it. You can't go back and say, oh, well, what I really meant was this. It's an append-only list of transactions or data. It also gives you information transparency because by default, every participant in a blockchain network can see the information on the blockchain. That's what makes it useful. Auditability is immediate and guaranteed because the data is there for everyone to see. It also solves something called the double spend problem. So when we take blockchain and we apply it to Bitcoin or blockchain and apply it to any of these other digital currencies, blockchain solves the double spend problem, which is what's more commonly known as counterfeiting. So I have here, let me stop. Okay, hopefully you can see my video. I have here a stack of $100 bills. And I can go spend this $100 bill at the gas station, this $100 bill at Target, this $100 bill at Meijer. What those three entities don't know is that these have the same serial number. They are counterfeit bills. So I have received goods and I've spent now 3 times the same asset. Blockchain says you can't do that. There's only one $100 bill and there's no way to counterfeit it. There's no way to claim that this is mine if I don't already own it. We'll see how that works with some math in just a second. But the double spend problem is one that's historically plagued any financial policy and decision making because counterfeiting is easy. I got these on Amazon. I'm trying to pass one of these off in a cab late at night. It looks pretty real. It feels pretty real. In a blockchain network, you simply can't do that because by design, you're not able to spend something or send something that you don't already have. I like doing this part of the presentation in a college classroom because I hand them $100 bills and it takes them quite a long time to realize that 1, they're counterfeit, but 2, they all have the same serial number. Let me share again this slide. So we're solving the double spend problem, which means 2 of the same thing. In a blockchain network, there are no duplicates. And here's how that works. There's cryptography involved. I'm going to do a bit of hand waving in this presentation just because I assume that all of you don't love math as much as I do. But the idea is there are 2 sides of cryptography that are important for this exercise. The first is something called a public key. The second is called a private key. Now, if you take the qualifier there, public and private, it tells you who should have which. You, as a user in a blockchain, should always have your private key. It is exclusive to you. Nobody else should ever know it. In contrast, the public key is known publicly. So what you can do in a blockchain network, Bitcoin, any of these cryptocurrencies operate fairly similarly. You can do something called encryption. So if you have a super secret message that you want to tell somebody, you can encrypt that message using a public key that they've given you. It's out in the public. So you take the message, you encrypt it with their public key, and you send it to them. And when you send it to them, it's encrypted. So anyone in the middle looking at this just sees a really gobbledygook set of this. Now, on the other end, they can take their private key, and because they are the only person that owns their private key, they can decrypt the message to get back the original secret. So I'm going to run through this one more time because it's foundational to what we're about to discuss. So if you have something that you want to encrypt to send to somebody else, it could be information, it could be a digital asset or a cryptocurrency. You can encrypt that with their public key. It turns into an encrypted form. And they are the only person on the planet that can decrypt that mathematically using their private key. All of that hinges on the fact that their private key has been kept secret. If you reverse these 2 things, you've got a bigger problem because you probably have been scammed. All of your money is gone and your messages are no longer secret. So in a blockchain network, we use something called digital signatures, which operate in the exact reverse of the example I had just provided. So you have a transaction that could be, I'm sending a Bitcoin to Dick. It could be the information about my land deed, if I'm storing that on a blockchain. It could be my payroll information. It could be whatever. I can encrypt that information with my private key. I'm the only person that has my private key, and I can encrypt that information with my private key. Same thing flows through. Anyone looking at it would see this gobbled set of letters and numbers that mean nothing. In a blockchain network, the public key associated with that private key can be used to decrypt the transaction. And what you end up with is the original transaction information. So instead of passing out counterfeit $100 bills, in order to send $100 on a cryptocurrency on a blockchain, I have to encrypt that transaction with my private key. And the entire network gets to scrutinize it and say, did he really have that $100? They can verify that mathematically using the public key. If none of that made any sense, that's okay. It took me a really long time to figure it out. But the idea is, on a blockchain network, the security comes from the mathematics behind the exchange of information. Blockchain and Bitcoin are not the same thing. Bitcoin is an implementation of a blockchain. Blockchain is really just the underlying storage of information. So back to the earlier slide, immutable data, no double spending. How is information stored chronologically in an immutable way? Bitcoin uses payments on top of that to ensure that things aren't sent twice. You can prove ownership, and there's some cryptography behind the scenes that makes all of this work. So in a Bitcoin network or a cryptocurrency network, people have addresses. Sometimes people call those wallets. They're not synonyms, but they're close enough. And an address is a unique identifier for a place to store something. In the Bitcoin network, you're storing Bitcoin. That's what you're transacting. In other blockchain networks, you could be storing information. And you can derive all of these bits and pieces, the public key, the private key, and ultimately the address from each other. I say all that because Bitcoin is not an anonymous network. In fact, the majority of these cryptocurrency networks are not anonymous. They're pseudonymous, which means if you know someone's address, if you know their Bitcoin address, if you know their Ethereum address, if you know their Ripple address, if you know any of their cryptocurrency addresses, you know who they are as individuals. So today, if you're following the Senate, if you're following Congress, if you're following any of the major media outlets, there's a lot of discussion around knowing your customer, anti-money laundering, all these things that we do traditionally in today's banking economy. So if you wanted to go open an account with Chase Bank, they're going to say, we need your driver's license or passport, social security card. We need to prove who you are so we can assign your account number to your individual identity. Bitcoin skips the part in the middle, which is know your customer and anti-money laundering. Regulators don't like that. So there's been discussion around how do we bring these new and evolving cryptocurrencies, $4 billion a day in financial value. How do we bring that closer to the traditional guardrails of the financial ecosystem as we understand it today? Private key is really important because if someone has your private key, they are able to send transactions originating from your address. In the Bitcoin network, that means they can send your money. In the broader scope of a blockchain, it means they can decrypt your information. Mathematically, your odds of winning the Powerball are 1 in 292 million. So most people aren't going to go run out and buy a Powerball ticket because they're not expecting that they're going to hit the jackpot. Mathematically, the odds are very stacked against them. Your odds of someone correctly guessing your private key and having access to your information or having access to send your funds look much worse than winning the Powerball. I don't know what this number is. I'd encourage you to maybe look up how many zeros that is, but mathematically, it's infeasible for someone to correctly guess your cryptocurrency private key. And that's one of the foundations of this technology and what makes it so secure. I'm going to skip the section on mining because I've heard from many a folk that it is just way too boring. So I want to skip to blockchain more broadly. There are 3 types of blockchain networks: public networks, permission networks, private networks. On the left, public, these are networks that are open to any participant imaginable. Bitcoin is a great example of a public blockchain because participants can come and go as they please. They can choose whether or not to participate in the network. It's open to everybody. On the complete opposite side, private blockchain networks can be used by like a traditional company. a single company. In today's world, we use databases to store a lot of this information. In the middle, the gray area, undeliberately, is permissioned blockchain. This is where the cool stuff happens at a corporate level, because you have a set of known participants in a network that are sharing information. So imagine automakers, GM, Ford, Mazda, all sharing information about safety, about standards, about supply chain, about recalls. There's more trust as you move right on these slides, because you know the individuals, or they're entirely your own set of individuals within a single company. But it becomes, as you move right with that higher degree of trust, you also lose decentralization. Your data becomes more centralized. The middle part is the cool part, because you have natural competitors sharing information and collaborating that know each other and trust each other. Using Bitcoin again on the left, you have a very low degree of trust. You don't know who anyone in the Bitcoin network is, but you have a very high degree of decentralization. It's never going to get shut down. It's entirely distributed. There's no single actor that can collude to censor your transactions, do anything like that. On the opposite end, in these private blockchains, or even in some permissioned or hybrid blockchains, there's a much higher degree of trust, because you have identity, but there's a much lower degree of decentralization, right? Ford could go bankrupt, and now all of that information is lost and no longer shared with GM and Mazda. Dick asked earlier about different types of blockchains. Here are 5 examples. Are they permissioned, meaning is there identity involved from baked into the protocol of the network? Are there tokens involved in the Bitcoin network? Bitcoin is the digital currency, or the token that is exchanged. It's the thing that changes for value. Ethereum also has tokens. Can you program on these different blockchains? So can you add a layer of computer code on top to do interesting things? Some blockchains, Ethereum as an example, are programmable, which means you can write a set of instructions that happens autonomously based on information within a blockchain. So maybe it's a mortgage payment. Your landlord's on a blockchain, you're on the blockchain. First of the month, you agree that $600 goes from your account to their account. It's programmatic decision making. And once you're no longer a tenant there, automatically those payments stop. You can start to do some interesting things on top of blockchain technology. And there are 3 really good keys to know whether or not a blockchain could be a good idea. The first is that you want to know, does your data need to be immutable? Meaning, should your data ever change? Historically, you can always add new data, you can correct things going forward, but the blockchain will maintain a list chronologically of things that have happened. So you want to ensure, if you're using a blockchain, that you don't need to go back in time 10 years and change something. Instead, you would append it later as a revision. Could you benefit from transparent data? In the case of auto manufacturers, is there a benefit to everyone having access to the same transparency of some information, like safety recalls? Probably. Another great use case for blockchain is anything where you need automatic, predictable decision making. There was a really cool blockchain project, I want to say probably 4 years ago, that did flight insurance. So you could go on the blockchain, you could purchase flight insurance for your upcoming travel. Programmatically, without any intermediary, using public data sources, it would pay you out if your flight was delayed or canceled. It wouldn't pay you out if your flight was on time. Traditionally, you'd have to purchase insurance through a broker. You read the fine print. You'd have to wait for your payment. Someone would have to verify that your flight was late. And there becomes an element of discretion there. Okay, your flight was 2 minutes late. Was it really late? The company has an incentive not to pay out your insurance amount because it was only 2 minutes late. Like, come on, common sense. Programmatically, there's no ambiguity. Your flight was 2 minutes late, you get the payout for the insurance because you paid the premium. So you can solve some interesting problems around identity. You can solve interesting problems around insurance, healthcare, and supply chain. I'm coming up, I got about 15 minutes left. I'm feeling good about the content that I have to present. I haven't seen any questions in the chat. Feel free to unmute or jump in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going full steam ahead. So I like to use the example of, yes.
Go ahead.
I have a question. You mentioned a fundamental concept that's needed to be required, and I'm not sure.
Oh, the video came on, but the audio got muted.
Okay.
Okay.
There we go.
Going back just a bit, you mentioned that fundamental concept is that the number of tokens or bitcoins or whatever tokens, I guess, would be the generic
Great
name, is limited. How is it limited and by whom? And then a second question I have is, I'm beginning to understand a bit of the concept of where Bitcoin has value and can be used in many different ways. But similar to it is the conflict, potential conflict that I see in terms of social cost to operate all of this massive information exchange, the energy that goes into computers and so on that do this. Are those two questions that are relevant at this point?
Entirely, sure. The first question I think was, who decides how many tokens are in existence and how is that enforced? And the second question I heard is, what are our thoughts around the cost of operating a network, whether that's societal impacts or energy impacts? Happy to take both of those. Each cryptocurrency decides isn't a great word, but each cryptocurrency was initially written with a cap. Some networks don't have any caps. They're not interested in a deflationary money supply. Maybe there's not actually a money aspect to it. It's not a cryptocurrency per se. It's a blockchain to facilitate information exchange without a value to it. Bitcoin has a hard-coded limit, meaning in the computer code itself, there is a maximum number. I don't remember what that number is, but it is there. Bitcoin also goes out 8 decimals. So today in our traditional US financial system, we have a penny as the smallest denomination. Bitcoin goes out much further. So the idea, I assume, from Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper is that as you start to approach that cap in the supply, those smaller denominations become more relevant. And it's almost like a micro payment infrastructure where you're not exchanging one Bitcoin, you're exchanging a very small fraction of one Bitcoin. And because there are so many fractions, the unit becomes more relevant. So simple answer is Satoshi Nakamoto decided there would be a certain number. I don't remember what that number is. And it's enforced by the computer code that the blockchain network operates on. So each of these participants in the network could be running a set of computer code. If that set of computer code doesn't match with everyone else's, they're not going to be able to participate in the network. It's not a cross-compatible thing. Energy is a whole different can of worms. Bitcoin mining, I have a slide on what these look like. Bitcoin mining itself, mining is the process of ensuring that the transactions are valid and that the transactions are recorded. So in 10 years ago, you could do Bitcoin mining on just simple commodity hardware, like the old computer you have in your basement. It very quickly became this gold rush of sorts to do things faster and cheaper. So again, Bitcoin mining is the process of ensuring that I'm not double spending the same $100 in 2 places, that I owned the $100. It's what secures the network, and it's a ton of math. Nobody has ever liked that section of the presentation, so I've omitted it. I have the slides. I can send them out if you're interested. But you can do them on these tiny little thumb drives, which is the one on the left on the screen. Very similar to a flash drive that you might store documents on. You can use those to process computing power dedicated towards this. More recently, the middle folks went to graphics cards because they were more of a commodity hardware that people had. Your computer, by definition, has a graphics card if you're able to see the visuals on the screen right now. But today, it's more or less the stuff on the right, which is the cute little Pikachu Pokemon thing. It's humongous data centers with not commodity hardware, with very specialized computational hardware that strictly solves these types of math problems to participate in the Bitcoin network or whatever the other cryptocurrency is that you want to use as an example. I have, I'll stop sharing again just so my face comes back up. This is an example of some of that specialized hardware. All of the aluminum that you see on this device is used to dissipate heat. And the computer chips that are on here doing the math are very, 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 very small. So the aluminum is outsized compared to the thing doing the math. One of these would sit next to two more of these to make one of the silver boxes in this example. So you can see Pikachu on the right in the center of that image. Behind Pikachu are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these little boards, all burning massive amounts of heat, as you can see by the aluminum fins, to dissipate that heat, working to solve math problems to participate in the Bitcoin network because there's a financial incentive for them to participate. Now, the idea is that as long as it's profitable to spend the electricity in the network, people will do it. If I told you you could leave your closet light bulb on all day, every day, and your energy bill would go down, you would leave your closet light bulb on. And that's exactly what happens in these networks is as long as the input in electricity is financially less than the output received in currency from these networks, people are going to run these facilities. Are there major environmental impacts surrounding this? Probably. I don't have answers to that. There are different types of mining that can happen. It doesn't all have to be like the Bitcoin network that uses these specialized equipments to solve useless math problems. There are some cryptocurrency networks that use a concept called proof of stake. So the more cryptocurrency you have in a network, the more voting power you have on transactions being valid, the more seriously your claims are taken for double spending money and things like this. That removes the energy component and it gives folks a financial incentive to remain honest. If you were a 10% decision maker in a financial ecosystem, it's very unlikely that you would make decisions that would undermine the value of your investment. In the Bitcoin network, it doesn't matter. You're running math problems on commodity hardware, and that does use electricity. In some of these other networks, you're putting a financial investment to participate in the network, and you wouldn't want to sabotage your investment, for example. There are lots of discussions around Bitcoin mining. I have a nifty little map here of where Bitcoin miners are around the world. This is not to scale. Each of these blue dots does not represent a size of an operation. So the little guys out here in the Atlantic Ocean, those could be thumb drives, those could be graphics cards, those could be huge data centers floating in the ocean. I don't know. But what you'll notice is that they tend to centralize mining operations in areas that have one of two or both things. The first is access to cheap electricity, whether that's subsidized from the government or just naturally available. Solar power, wind power, hydro, whatever. The second thing is that they tend to centralize in colder environments because you don't have to pay to cool your very hot equipment if you can just open the window and run a fan that lets in Arctic air. So places like Iceland have humongous data centers. That's where this picture is from. This is a mining operation in Iceland. That's pretty cool. Free air conditioning at what kind of environmental cost? The counter argument that I've heard that I don't necessarily agree with, but is intellectually stimulating. Okay, the Bitcoin network is clearly very energy intensive. How much does it cost to operate the Visa network? You think about all the plug-in terminals and the gas pumps and the card readers and the plastic to make the cards, and what environmental impact does Visa have on the network, on the global economy and nature? Again, I don't necessarily agree with that comparison, but it's intellectually interesting. I hope I've addressed at least partially those two questions. I only have about 5 minutes left, so I want to just go through a couple of real use cases. Supply chain. You can prove provenance with items in a blockchain. So where did it come from? How did it get there? That's the Cotton Eye Joe song. But companies are actually doing this. IBM, Oracle, luxury Lamborghini cars. You can prove along the way how something got to where it is by having natural competitors or participants in a network all agree on the state of something at a given point in time and know that you can't change that decision once it's made. So the majority of high-end luxury cars get damaged at some point in transit before they reach the dealer. Where does that damage happen? Is it on the boat, the train? You can kind of point in time, say everything's good on this car, and have the port person sign off on it, a representative from Lamborghini, whatever the case may be. You get naturally interested individuals to agree, and no one can go back and change it. Wellspun is a great example of this before the blockchain existed. So 1,000% return to investors over a couple of years. They were environmentally responsible. They were sustainable. They had safety awards. And then people found out they were lying about the high grade cotton that they were using, and that it was actually very, very low grade cotton. So if you look at kind of the public perception as shown by the financial markets, they had this really, really nice share price run up, and then they found out, oh, hey, this isn't what you told us it was. So if we look at a supply chain, you could get people agreeing along the way that the assets are provably traced. You can show back to the beginning of planting what kind of cotton was used in your sheets. The car example, I love this one. What if you had recalls and safety, regulatory bodies, vehicle manufacturers, all sharing the same set of information? There's no need for reconciliation when everyone already has access to the same information. So you can get a lot faster out the door with your vehicles in a safer and more efficient way. Financial payments. There are 61 regulatory authorities in the United States. 61, that's 50, one for each state, plus 11 at the federal level. Reconciling money is a difficult problem. International payments, Santander Bank, huge in Spain, rolled out 3 clicks and 40-second international payments, and they used a blockchain for that. They said, we can prove we have the assets on our blockchain. Let's just digitally sign the transaction and send it on over. This is a bank with a 160-year history. This is an ancient bank doing really cool stuff in 4 different countries with international payments on a blockchain. They're not using Bitcoin. This is an example of a hybrid blockchain from our earlier examples, or a permission blockchain, but they're doing it on a blockchain. El Salvador announced last year that they made Bitcoin one of their legal tenders. The Royal Bank of Canada put out a patent to automate every step of the credit rating process to transparently look at indicators of creditworthiness. If you haven't looked at your credit report recently, I'd encourage you to do that. It's good practice, but also you'll never have any idea how they come up with the credit score that you're given. You have maybe an inkling of why it might not be higher, or, I'm really always on time with my payments, but you'll never know that system. It is so protected. Imagine if you could do it transparently to see, how creditworthy you were and why. So all of these things work together on a blockchain. From the bottom of the light bulb up, you start with, how is the data stored? Then you work into the stem of the light bulb. How is that data validated? in the Bitcoin network, that's the mining process. A lot of cryptocurrencies have something similar. You're solving for double spend. You're solving for proof of ownership. Moving up the light bulb, what data is on that network? Is it car records? Is it financial information? Is it identity information? Is it flight insurance? And then all the way up the light bulb becomes the application layer. What does it actually do? The Bitcoin network transfers Bitcoin. And people have said, okay, Bitcoin has value, so let's use it as a money network. You can do lots of different things at the application layer, looking at the base of that light bulb and how you're storing the data, how you're validating the data that's being stored, and then what you do with it. There are a lot of challenges with blockchain. The first and foremost is public image. People are naturally terrified of things they don't understand. So you see Bitcoin exchange hacked and drug markets using Bitcoin. Like, none of that says, give it a shot. There are social and ethical implications. What if you store something on a blockchain that's not supposed to be there? In the EU, there's the right to be forgotten. You can have data removed. Well, if that's stored immutably on a public ledger, how do you forget it? Integration, how do you integrate some of these really, really old legacy systems? If you've recently booked a flight, a car, a hotel, any of that type of travel reservation, you touched a system built by IBM in the 1960s called Sabre. That's not something that you can just turn off for a weekend to try something new. But there are certainly opportunities for improvement in those areas. I'm officially running up on the clock. I will give you 2 resources if you're curious to learn more. The first is the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. This is the idea of programming on a blockchain and some of the cool things that you can do. They have a website. It's designed for enterprises, but a lot of their projects I think would be really interesting to this group. Happy to send around the slides. I know I'm breezing through a few of them. The second is the Hyperledger project. This was built by the Linux Foundation. So you have Apple computers, you have Windows computers, you have the Linux computer. Apple is a version of Linux. Regardless, a really big name in the technology space that's doing a lot of really cool blockchain projects, none of which have to do with Bitcoin. So if you're turned off by Bitcoin, go check these folks out. And here are my predictions. I think we're going to see a lot more adoption of these types of technologies. That doesn't mean I think Bitcoin is going to be the next best thing, but it does mean that I think blockchain has a lot of great potential for reconciliation to make processes more efficient and more transparent. I think you'll see consolidation. Dick asked earlier how many cryptocurrencies are there. I said thousands. I think those will naturally consolidate. No one wants to use 1,000 different cryptocurrencies, much less keep track of your private keys for all of those things. And I think we'll continue to see, as we're seeing today, a lot of regulatory movement in these spaces. So again, 61 regulatory agencies, getting them all to agree is going to take 100 years anyway. But we have monolith systems today that are backed by some governmental guardrails. I think we'll continue to see those guardrails getting implemented. Do you still agree? Do you still disagree? I am more likely to agree every time I give this presentation. I think blockchain does have the power to transform the old order of human affairs for the better. If you enjoyed any part of this presentation, I encourage you to check out any of these books that are interesting to you. And if you will grace me with a 2-minute survey before you leave and go outside, you can either scan this block with your phone, or you can go to survey.thatbookonblockchain.com. It's a 2-minute survey that lets me know what you liked about the presentation, what you didn't like about the presentation, and some food for thought the next time I give this presentation. So your 2 minutes of survey feedback will directly influence the next hour someone has to listen to me talk. I appreciate all of your attention. Great questions today. I'm happy to stick around for a few minutes as folks have questions, but I wanted to make sure that I let you go on time because, boy, the weather's great. Thanks, folks.
Thank you. That was very interesting. I'm not sure what I learned yet, but I'll have to look at the video again.
It goes quick.
Well, I think what you're saying is blockchain and has a lot of uses beyond the Bitcoin type of things we hear the most about.
Absolutely correct. You move away from moving money and you move closer towards moving information and sharing information that you know to be correct with lots of different parties that all have a vested interest in ensuring that information stays correct. The information becomes the value that's being exchanged.
I'm trying to find my QR code reader. I can't find it right now. See if it works.
You'll have to type survey.
Right. So your books are available. Are they both in printed form and I should say, are they available on as an e-reader format?
Yes. I am still a paper person, so that was a non-negotiable for me. I needed a paper format, but there are also versions for digital readers as well.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm a retired antitrust lawyer.
Awesome. I'm glad you're retired.
I'm just wondering what concerns, whether the antitrust agencies, Department of Justice in particular, they have any concerns about some of this information sharing?
I am completely sure that they have concerns about a lot of the stuff around this technology. So we can separate the money aspect of the cryptocurrency, and we can separate the blockchain aspect of the data sharing. I'm sure they would have an interest in both of those and in coming at them from different angles, but you'll already see a lot of DOJ involvement, FBI involvement in criminal cases. For example, the fuel company, I'm drawing a blank on the name, that had the ransomware attack and had to make a very large payment in Bitcoin. The DOJ was able to kind of intercept that payment and recover some of the funds. It's certainly on law enforcement's radar, and there's a lot out of my pay grade to even think about in terms of data privacy, antitrust, know your customer, right to be forgotten. Just data privacy in general, I think, is a huge new can of worms with this. HIPAA.
Okay.
What if you stored healthcare records on a blockchain? What would that look like?
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm glad you're retired. You can think about it, but you don't have to worry about it.
I'm glad I'm retired too.
Jonathan's Dick Brummer. Yeah, there seems to be a lot of this that's in direct conflict with the privacy concerns, and as you said, the right to disappear, or whatever they call it in Europe, erase your tracks kind of a thing. So it's interesting how that will proceed.
Absolutely. And it makes you question also which information or which companies already have what information about you, whether you volunteer that information or not. And blockchain can solve some really interesting identity considerations as well. I like to use the example of going to a gas station and purchasing a beer. If you were to go to a gas station and purchase a beer, the clerk is going to ask to see your ID. What the clerk is really interested in is are you of legal age to purchase alcohol? But instead, you're providing the gas station your name, your picture, your address, your birthday, your driver's license number, expiration date, issue date, all of the things that show up on that piece of plastic, when all they really care about is the individual presenting themselves of age. Blockchain can do some interesting stuff with selectively disclosing pieces of information without telling you what those things are. So the clerk doesn't need to know that you're 54. The clerk just needs to know you're older than 18 or older than 21. So identity is a really interesting area within blockchains, and selectively disclosing pieces of information while keeping the rest completely secret.
Okay, interesting. Any other questions for Jonathan? As I said at the beginning, this is being recorded, so if you'd like to go back in a few days, we'll get it on our YouTube channel. So if you'd like to share the information with someone else or take another review, it'll be available. One last call for questions.
And Jan, that was the Colonial Pipeline Company I was thinking of.
Right,
The,
right. Yeah, I couldn't think of it.
the ransomware attack there, where the federal authorities got involved and were able to. I mean, I'm sure that's fascinating to read from a court case perspective.
Yeah, I read some of that. They basically, since the information was all public, they found out where the server was that actually was containing the information, and somehow they got it off them. I don't know.
Somehow they got that private key that I was talking about.
Right, right, exactly.
And once you have that private key, it's not
Well,
yours.
it sounded like what the ransomware folks did is they pay people, so they gave all these people the private key, and somehow somehow the government got a hold of, as you said, the private key. It wasn't per individual, it was per group. So that's interesting.
They should have come to my talk.